A New York City mayor made a sweeping announcement about making buses completely free, but the proposal fell apart as soon as anyone looked at the real financial numbers behind it. This pattern isn't unusual since we've seen identical scenarios unfold many times in various cities under different political leaders. Politicians regularly announce major initiatives will suddenly cost nothing, which initially generates excitement and optimism among residents who imagine easier daily lives. Then the actual financial reality emerges, and the entire vision collapses under its own weight. Trump identified the critical weaknesses in this proposal well ahead of others because he possesses genuine understanding of financial management, budget mechanics, and how large urban systems actually function in practice rather than theory. New York's reaction exploded rapidly following his direct commentary since his statement stripped away the illusions and revealed the unstable foundation supporting this impractical concept. The primary enormous challenge with the mayor's transportation proposal is remarkably straightforward once examined closely. New York's bus infrastructure already runs at a deficit without sufficient resources to maintain smooth operations. The vehicle fleet contains aging, deteriorating buses experiencing frequent breakdowns, routes unchanged for many years, and maintenance backlogs extending indefinitely into the future. The infrastructure desperately requires billions simply to sustain basic functioning and avoid total systemic failure. When someone suddenly proposes eliminating all passenger fares completely, the financial bleeding becomes absolutely catastrophic and impossible to sustain. Transportation analysts calculated the real figures and determined this proposal would require approximately $700 to $800 million annually just to remain operational. This isn't trivial money or spare change discovered between furniture cushions. This isn't something city leadership can manifest from nothing merely because the suggestion sounds appealing and generates positive feelings. This illustrates the essential reality that gets repeatedly overlooked. A mass transit infrastructure operates on concrete financial principles, not emotional appeals or noble intentions. It functions according to strict numerical requirements, balanced financial planning, and the inflexible principles of matching supply with demand without collapsing. Trump articulated the harsh fundamental reality without softening anything. He stated plainly that the city cannot function and prosper based on attractive fantasies and hopeful wishing. He clarified that the mathematics fundamentally prohibits this dramatic transformation without causing severe damaging effects. Trump's assessment proved remarkably accurate. Historical evidence demonstrates clearly that municipalities which eliminate major revenue sources without establishing solid alternative funding inevitably resort to drastically cutting other essential services throughout their operations. They destroy public safety initiatives, abandon necessary infrastructure repairs, terminate employment for massive numbers of workers. Everything operates increasingly slowly and inefficiently. Everything deteriorates and weakens progressively until the entire infrastructure stands on the brink of failure. This exact catastrophe occurred in 1972 when New York City approached bankruptcy because leadership completely disregarded financial realities and existed in denial. The immediate response from MTA leadership confirmed this assessment beyond any reasonable question. Their chief executive, Jano Lieber, publicly acknowledged that the mayor's concept lacked any clear, comprehensive planning whatsoever. He characterized the proposal as seriously underdeveloped and inadequately prepared. That represents the courteous diplomatic way of explaining the plan wasn't remotely ready for actual implementation involving real finances and genuine consequences. Regular New York residents consequently felt profound unease and suspicion. They observed a leader making an extraordinarily large commitment without demonstrating actual financial figures or clarifying where funding would come from. People began recognizing the concept collapsed when examined seriously. It didn't fail due to political partisanship or personal criticism. It failed because mathematical reality invariably defeats fantasy eventually without any exceptions. Another critically significant aspect of this situation involves the strong response from Governor Kathy Hochul. She stated publicly that the transit infrastructure still fundamentally requires fare revenue to operate effectively. That single powerful statement completely undermined the central premise of the mayor's attention-grabbing announcement. When the governor, transportation professionals, and the president all simultaneously express identical positions, the proposal loses all believability extraordinarily quickly. This perfectly illustrates how fragile concepts shatter when confronted with genuine pressure. They disintegrate when someone possessing real expertise challenges them forcefully using factual information rather than emotional arguments. Trump comprehends New York City on a significantly deeper and more personal level than the mayor possibly could. He developed enormous buildings throughout that municipality for many decades. He directly managed difficult union negotiations, navigated countless permit requirements, handled construction complications, dealt with restricted budgets, and endured rigorous inspections. He understands precisely how the city responds when financial resources suddenly vanish and disappear. This explains why his statement carried such substantial weight and credibility. He cautioned explicitly that the city fundamentally requires stability and predictability, not reckless fantasy and irresponsible experimentation. He explained that careless proposals always damage the working class population first and most severely. He's completely accurate regarding that difficult truth. When transit infrastructures lose funding and become insolvent, poor neighborhoods invariably experience excruciatingly slow bus service, completely damaged facilities, and absurdly extended waiting periods in miserable conditions. Paradoxically, a free transportation plan actually injures and harms precisely the population it ostensibly intends to assist and defend. The most intriguing element of this entire episode involves how the mayor began quickly modifying his statements and retreating from his position. Before pressure intensified, he confidently described the plan as a complete, comprehensive initiative ready for implementation. After serious criticism accumulated, he abruptly characterized it as simply a pilot experiment, merely a limited test, a distant future possibility that might eventually materialize. That dramatic transformation reveals the concept lacked genuine strength and depth from the absolute beginning. Robust ideas with solid foundations don't mysteriously transform when challenged. Only weak concepts change shape and adapt frantically. This demonstrates that language invariably shifts when leaders desperately attempt concealing obvious deficiencies and difficulties, and voters can absolutely perceive this transparent manipulation. They can immediately detect when something appears dishonest and deceptive. New York's population reacted with frustration because they felt intentionally misled and deceived. They desire improved, cleaner, more dependable buses, certainly, but they desire honest truthfulness even more urgently. They want an authentic funding strategy with actual figures, not a superficial campaign phrase designed for attracting votes. This explains why this expanded into such an enormous controversial matter overnight. New Yorkers understand their city requires tremendous resources to operate. They recognize fundamentally that nothing truly costs nothing without someone paying eventually. When they finally observed the massive concealed expenses hidden beneath the surface, they immediately sensed the plan wasn't genuine or serious. Trump's forceful reaction generated additional intense pressure because he focused specifically on federal funding relationships. New York depends substantially on Washington for numerous critical resources, security assistance, emergency disaster funding, housing support initiatives, and essential transportation money all originate from federal sources. If a mayor recklessly advances an enormous concept without any coherent strategy or funding mechanism, the federal government will naturally scrutinize everything and potentially withdraw assistance. Trump simply articulated publicly what numerous federal officials were already considering privately. Once he stated it publicly for everyone to hear, every weak, vulnerable element of the proposal suddenly appeared in obvious clarity. This provides definitive evidence of a significantly deeper structural difficulty affecting governance. Numerous Democratic leaders characteristically begin with pure emotion and sentiment. They sincerely believe that positive intentions alone suffice for success. However, cities require rigorous logic and discipline, not merely optimism and aspirations. They need detailed financial planning, realistic schedules, and solid contingency strategies for when difficulties arise. When Democrats disregard these fundamentals and avoid the difficult work, their flashy concepts inevitably collapse. This explains why numerous large American municipalities currently struggle with crime, homelessness, and deterioration. They lead with emotions rather than structure and responsibility. The transportation concept failed dramatically because it attempted avoiding the most difficult component entirely. It attempted ignoring and circumventing the mathematics completely. Historical evidence teaches that avoiding the challenging elements invariably leads directly to failure. Trump grasps that fundamental principle instinctively. He might communicate in a straightforward, direct manner without elaborate language, but his judgment regarding expenses and dangers proves accurate remarkably frequently. He identifies a flawed plan immediately upon seeing one. New York already confronts overwhelming high expenses, quickly increasing requirements, and exceptionally constrained budgets with no flexibility. Adding another enormous financial obligation with absolutely no funding mechanism isn't leadership whatsoever. It represents reckless and hazardous behavior. New Yorkers perceive this truth immediately. This explains why the topic exploded throughout social media platforms. This explains why the entire city responded so loudly and emphatically. People understood the plan didn't correspond with reality in any substantial way. Trump's single blunt declaration accomplished what the entire municipal government couldn't achieve. It forced the uncomfortable reality into public view where everyone could observe it. It made people actually examine the figures rather than the sentiments. It made the mayor defend something he couldn't possibly justify with evidence. In the harsh world of politics, that's precisely how weak concepts experience painful deaths. This explains why the city erupted in controversy. This explains why the plan disintegrated. This explains why Trump's statement had such devastating influence. Weak concepts fail because they rest on optimism rather than evidence. This free transportation fantasy now functions as a perfect instructional example of why cities must acknowledge costs before offering grand commitments. This represents a completely foreseeable collapse because it follows the identical sequence we've observed in numerous cities throughout many decades. When leaders advance concepts without figures, the concepts shatter immediately when someone requests the financial statement. The initial thing people noticed after the plan disintegrated was genuine anxiety spreading throughout city departments. Workers immediately understood that eliminating bus fares without obtaining new funding would require severe reductions elsewhere. In straightforward terms, if you eliminate one revenue stream, you must eliminate one service somewhere. That's simply basic reasoning. Trump identified this elementary truth, and that alone generated more understanding than the entire city administration produced. This illustrates how effective common sense leadership becomes when the political infrastructure becomes confused and directionless. New Yorkers reacted so intensely because they perceived something significantly deeper occurring. They observed a mayor who committed to a huge concept but couldn't justify its expense honestly. People trust leaders who communicate honestly regarding limitations and restrictions. When leaders pretend no limitations exist whatsoever, people lose confidence extraordinarily rapidly. That's precisely what transpired here. The instant people observed hundreds of millions absent from the budget, they recognized the plan never existed as reality. It represented a message, not a framework. Trump's caution made the difficulty clearer. He stated you cannot operate a huge complex city with appealing concepts that don't correspond with budgetary reality. Historical evidence strongly validates this perspective. When San Francisco, Detroit, and Chicago attempted comparable free initiatives without adequate funding, their infrastructures failed, services degraded, delays extended longer, and residents departed the cities in significant numbers. Cities deteriorate quickly when leaders allow emotion to replace mathematics, and the mayor fell completely into that mistake. Another significant point involves how democratic leaders characteristically respond when evidence appears. Rather than correcting the figures honestly, they modified the messaging desperately. The mayor did precisely the identical thing. He altered the designation of the plan repeatedly. Initially, it represented a complete comprehensive strategy. Subsequently, it mysteriously became a pilot initiative, then a vision for future possibility. When terminology shifts this rapidly, it indicates the concept never possessed strong foundations. Honest concepts don't require new designations to withstand criticism. Only weak concepts require constant rewriting. Trump's position on this matter remains straightforward and unwavering. You cannot damage a functioning infrastructure by eliminating its funding. You cannot defend the poor by weakening the service they depend on most heavily. This is what numerous people overlook. When buses lose revenue, they don't improve in affluent neighborhoods. They deteriorate in impoverished neighborhoods. This explains why Trump cautioned so early. He has witnessed how cities collapse when leaders disregard fundamental financial discipline. The most critical element of this matter involves how confidence became damaged. Once people observe one concept disintegrate, they begin questioning everything additional. They wonder if the subsequent major commitment also conceals reality. This slows leadership effectiveness. Every department becomes cautious, every employee awaits clear directions, and every voter becomes increasingly difficult to persuade. This represents the expense of unrealistic politics. The damage persists long after the concept expires. Another factor that made this moment significant was the governor's response when Kathy Hochul stated that transit infrastructure still requires fare revenue. She revealed the discrepancy without even criticizing him directly. That's the strength of evidence. You don't need to debate, you simply declare the truth. The truth here was straightforward. The funding doesn't exist. Trump's caution and the governor's declaration together enabled the public to comprehend the complete picture. New York cannot function on experiments. It's excessively large, it operates excessively rapidly, and carries excessive responsibility. Large infrastructures fail when leaders impose concepts that disregard structure. The free transportation concept disregarded structure entirely. It overlooked expense, it overlooked supply, it overlooked long-term maintenance requirements, it even overlooked transit employees must receive compensation. A city cannot overlook these elements. Trump's statement reminded everyone. This occurrence will influence city politics for an extended period. The mayor will experience greater difficulty advancing new concepts. People will demand figures before expressing approval. Journalists will pose more difficult questions. Departments will resist. This occurs when confidence declines early. This explains why responsible leadership matters so significantly in the initial year. Errors made early prove extremely difficult to reverse. Trump emerged appearing stronger because he articulated truth before the infrastructure failed. When truth finally appeared, people recognized he was correct. This explains why his statement still influences national discussions. He doesn't require elaborate terminology. He doesn't require extended speeches. He only needs to indicate evidence everyone else avoids. Evidence possesses greater strength than slogans. The collapse of this plan cautions every city. It demonstrates leaders must acknowledge mathematics. They must acknowledge expenses. They must acknowledge structure. Great nations and cities deteriorate when leaders disregard these fundamentals. Historical evidence demonstrates this repeatedly. The free transportation concept represents simply another example of a city attempting to avoid the difficult component. What transpires subsequently depends on whether New York selects realism or fantasy. If it selects realism, it will demand genuine funding strategies. If it selects fantasy, it will observe more failed concepts. Trump's statement pushed the city toward realism. The mayor's statement pushed it toward fantasy. People must now determine which direction they prefer. Ultimately, this matter was never regarding buses. It concerned truth. It concerned honesty. It concerned acknowledging the limitations that keep cities functioning. The free transportation concept didn't collapse because Trump criticized it. It collapsed because reality revealed it. When reality communicates, politics must respond accordingly.